and they did find an aggressive lymphoma. Every single anti-cancer food that I read about, it was going into my diet. So if something means enough to you, you have to make up your mind to make it happen, even if you have naysayers around you. You have to be your own advocate and believe in yourself and believe in your ability to heal.
Lauren, you have a very inspiring cancer story I'm excited to get into today. And I think to start off, it's important we go all the way back to the beginning. And this is 2019, after Thanksgiving. You have what you think is a cold at the time, and you're dealing with it, I'm guessing, in a way like you would a regular cold. You know, you haven't seen a doctor, but you're trying to treat yourself at home and get over it. It's lingering. The family starts to get concerned and wants you to go in and see the doctor. So you go to a walk-in clinic on a Saturday, and I'll have you take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, so I'd been dealing with this thing for probably like 3 weeks. It was actually a few days before Thanksgiving. And like you said, my husband and my parents specifically were like, you have to get this checked out. My husband was actually away that day with work. And so it was just me and the kids, and my dad had come over to help me for the day, because my youngest at the time was just a baby. And so I was hoping to just be like in and out of this clinic, like, 20 minutes, get it diagnosed, bring home some medicine, clear it up, the end. And obviously what happened was very different. Went into the urgent care, and they were just like, we think it's pneumonia, but we need to x-ray you because we can't prescribe the correct meds unless we know the type of the pneumonia, the extent of the pneumonia, et cetera. So they brought me over to the x-ray room, and I had this very odd feeling as I put my arms over my head. I'm really not like a superstitious person, but I just had this very terrible feeling, even though my symptoms at that point, even though I was sick, it's not like I was dying. I was just having a hard time shaking the cold. And they took the x-ray, and I was trying to calm my nerves and just went back into the room. And the woman came in, and just her face said it all. She just was like, listen, I don't want you to get concerned, but, you do have pneumonia in both lungs, but you also have what appears to be a very large mass in your chest. And they showed me the x-ray, and I'm no radiology expert, but this thing was like that, right in my center of my chest cavity. And honestly, I started to black out. I started to faint. It's hard even talking about it. And they gave me oxygen. And they told me, we need you to go to a hospital and get it x-rayed. And that's what I did, a CAT scan. So I went straight to the hospital, told my parents, called my husband. My husband dropped everything at his job, started driving the 2 hours home to Jersey. My mom rushed to take the kids. My dad came with me to the hospital. And I was admitted overnight to care for the pneumonia. At that point, like I said, it had spread to both lungs. It was a bacterial pneumonia, so they had to treat it with antibiotics. So I was given an IV for the antibiotics, and then I was taken in for a CAT scan. When the CAT scan was over, it was just a waiting game. I was in my room, and I was just thinking, is this it? Am I going to get diagnosed with some horrible, end stage cancer? I'm a never smoker and have always lived a relatively healthy lifestyle. I've labored with 2 kids. I ran a half marathon, had no idea that this thing was in my body, had 0 symptoms relating to it. And if I did, they were kind of overshadowed by the pneumonia symptoms at that point. So right before I fell asleep that night, I don't even know what time it was. I think it was probably 1 or 2 in the morning in the hospital. A nurse came in, and I just asked, I said, do you have any idea what this thing is? And she just was like, they don't think it's cancer, but you're going to need more testing. So the next day I was discharged with meds for my pneumonia. Thankfully that quickly cleared up. But the cancer journey, or a journey with this mass in my chest, was sort of just starting. And I was, basically the next few months had to go to a number of specialists. At first I saw a cardiologist. They did an EKG and other heart tests on me because this thing was right next to my pericardium. So right next to my heart. They determined that, my heart was in good shape and it wasn't impacting my heart function, thankfully. But the cardiologist I'm forever grateful to her because she recommended me to my surgeon. And she said, listen, even if this thing is not cancer, it's massive and it has to come out. And I'm going to recommend you to somebody. And it was just such a whirlwind. You know, I was just kind of at this point being carried by the river, met with this surgeon. I remember it being like pretty much the worst day of my life. I was just so fearful for what he was going to say. And immediately he relieved some of my fears. He said, this is not like a classic, this is a tumor. He said, this is something that very well could not be cancer. In fact, it's probably not, but, we're going to put you through a PET scan. We're going to see what the story is before surgery, because apparently the danger of infection was too big with biopsying it. So I had to go through a PET scan. The PET scan was, again, indeterminate. There was some areas that were lighting up. So they just agreed like the best course of action was just to just take it out. So I went through surgery in March of 2020. Had to have a more invasive thoracotomy. There's one that you can do that's less invasive. Unfortunately, I had to have the full Monty. And, I was just so relieved the next day that it was over. Even though I was in pain and, it had been a pretty brutal procedure, I was just so excited to be done. And I thought I was done. And as I've mentioned in other interviews, I was released from the hospital the next day, even though I was supposed to be in the hospital for 5 to 6 days to recover. COVID was starting to spread, and they felt it was too risky for me to stay in the hospital. And I'm pretty sure they probably had to free up the beds for other patients. So went home and sort of began my healing journey there.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. And I want to take some time and get into the nuances of this period of time between finding out you have this mass in your body all the way until surgery, which isn't until almost spring. So that's a long time to be thinking about what this could be and what this could mean for my life moving forward.
Yeah. So like I said, the first appointment, the cardiology appointment, was probably like mid-December. So several weeks after I went for the initial overnight stay in the hospital. And, they were making sure I was completely recovered from the pneumonia. And I remember the cardiologist just seemed like almost confused by the mass. And that was very unsettling for me. And it's, no disrespect to her. She's an incredible doctor. I've actually recommended her to other people since then, but she just was like, I don't know what the hell this thing is. And I think just the mere size of it and the positioning of it was alarming to her. So she was just like, we're going to set you up with a surgeon. The holiday was right in between. So like I said, this was like mid-December. So only a week or so later was Christmas and then New Year's. So the earliest that the surgeon could see me was mid-January. And at that point, he had seen many, many scans just like mine, not with my particular issue, but of course he's a thoracic surgeon. He specializes in thoracic oncology. So he was pretty confident that this was, and because it wasn't impacting my heart function and my breathing function, I don't think at any point anyone thought this was like an acute issue that had to come out right away. And it also wasn't obviously cancer. So I think that's why there was a little bit of time in between. But, it was pretty excruciating for me. I'm a worrier. And I think a lot of people, when they're faced with a health issue that they're not sure what it is, they hit the computer, they hit Google. And I was diagnosing myself with like every cancer under the sun, like lung cancer, you name it, like end stage. And I just was like in my head, like, is this my last holiday with my family? I was freaking out. And all the while, like just trying to maintain a sense of normalcy at home. It was the holidays. My oldest daughter's birthday is right before Christmas. My youngest daughter's birthday is, in February. So, there was all these things that I was trying to be a great mom and trying to have, a normal holiday with my family while thinking that I might be dying. And that was really hard. I just felt like very confused. Like, why is this happening to me? I had tried my whole life to be healthy and, do the right things and avoid things that could send me down a bad health path. And once, I was given that reassurance, that appointment with the surgeon where he was like, it's probably not cancer, then I could breathe a little bit. But I still knew I had the surgery ahead of me. And to be honest, that was the thing I was like least freaked out about. I trusted him implicitly. He was top of his game, one of the best in the area. And, I just knew that he would take good care of me. And then like once I was released, when he took out the cyst, he was like, it looks okay. Like he didn't take it out and, think that it was like, suspicious. So again, I was relieved. What started to raise flags for me was, right when I got released, like I said, it was the beginning of the shutdown for COVID. So there were some delays with my pathology, which I was like, okay, that's not totally unusual. They have bigger issues to deal with in the hospital. And because of all the reassurances I had been given, I just thought it wasn't a big deal. And then I had a follow-up appointment with him, a post-surgery appointment, like a week or two later in person. And he was just like, I don't have pathology results for you yet. And I was like, oh, no big deal. It's okay. And he was like, we had to send it over to Sloan Kettering for some further evaluation just to rule out cancer. And as soon as he said that, I was like, what? Like, why are you sending it to Sloan Kettering? And why are we ruling out cancer? I thought we ruled out cancer. And he was just like, I want you to stay calm. I'm sure it's fine. We just have to, it's a good thing. We have to rule everything out. And so I was like, okay. And went home, tried to not freak about it. And then a couple weeks later, he called me and just told me, unfortunately, even though your mass was benign, it was a thymic cyst. We took out your thymus as a precautionary measure since you don't really need that gland as an adult. And they did find an aggressive lymphoma. I read my own pathology report. It was just surreal. Like I literally checked the name to make sure it's the right person. And then started my cancer journey.
Right now, the latest YouTube stats are showing that 91.8% of you that are watching the videos aren't subscribed to the channel. If you're one of these people, you've been enjoying the videos, please take a second and subscribe below. This is going to help the community continue to grow and help the channel continue to bring on the biggest guests. Thank you ahead of time. Enjoy the rest of the episode. I'm curious, the dynamics in that period of time that we've discussed so far, there's an interesting layer that we're going to tease out to this whole story, the fact that you're a public figure and you're a public figure in the health world. So as this is all happening, who knows what's happening? Like, do your kids know? Do you share with your audience online that you're going through a health challenge? And if you do, to what degree do you share what's going on?
So my family obviously knew that something was going on. I mean, my husband obviously knew everything. My husband and my parents were my primary support during this time. I don't think I could have gotten through it without them. My kids knew that I had had pneumonia, and because I was recovering, I had to figure out a way to explain to them why I was continuing to go in for these tests. I was also, not that they would notice this, but I was like dropping weight rapidly, which is very unusual for me. So my appearance was changing slightly and I was just fried, I was just not myself. And so I told my older daughter who, was kind of old enough to know that something was wrong, that I just told her I had a bubble in my chest and they needed to take the bubble out because the bubble was really big. And so that's what I told her. My inner community, like my daughter's school, knew I was having surgery. Because I'm, a very hands-on mom. I'm there at everything. And there was a period of time, when I was having the surgery that I was not around. This was before the schools had shut down. And so I had to make everyone aware of this thing. But I didn't really give too many details except for a couple of friends. In terms of my audience, I didn't say anything. I just didn't know where it was going to go. And it was the scariest thing I've gone through, and I wasn't ready to talk about it, especially since I had no idea where it would end or how it would end. I always knew at some point I would have to talk about it, even if it was okay, because it was such a major change in my life and period of my life. I knew it was going to impact how I thought about food and how I thought about health and nutrition and how I handled my own diet. Regardless of how it ended, I knew that. So I was just kind of waiting until I felt like my feet were firmly on the ground. Because I didn't feel that way for a while. It was probably a good year after everything had transpired that, I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to talk about it now that I feel like I'm not imminently going to die from this. And I had reached out to a friend, Chuck Carroll, who does PCRM's podcast, and I felt very safe telling my story to him. And Dr. Yami from Veggie Doctor Radio, I opened up to her, and that was really the beginning of me feeling comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, I've watched both of those. Well, I listened to one and watched the other interview. They're incredible. What was the response like when you put your message out there? Was it received warmly, or how did the audience take that?
It was so much better than I could have imagined. I was very fearful that that my credibility was going to be dinged, because when you're someone who promotes health and wellness through diet and then you're not well, I was so worried that it would damage veganism, like more than it would damage me. I just really strongly believe in the plant-based lifestyle. And I was worried that, hearing my story might dissuade someone from making changes that I feel are really powerful. And but I realized, if my story is going to change someone's perspective of an entire lifestyle, one person, and they don't even know, the rest of my lifestyle, then that's really not my responsibility. I can't be try to be the spokesperson for veganism. That's not my job. So thankfully, it was the opposite. Everyone was very, very warm toward me. I've received so many beautiful messages. The ones that impact me the most are people who are either going through something themselves, a diagnosis or a loved one, and they feel less alone, especially when choosing a path that's not conventional. But even those who are choosing a conventional path, I think it's so empowering that people are still looking to make lifestyle change to help them get through it and hopefully come out the other side.
I really want to make sure throughout our conversation we take time and talk about your diet and lifestyle before, during, and after treatment. But I think before we do that, we should pick up the story from when you read that pathology report, double check the name, find out it is you. Take the story from there. What do you do next?
Again, it was bizarre to see my name on a report from Memorial Sloan Kettering scientists. And I actually Googled the scientists. I was like, do these people know what they're doing? And they indeed do know what they're doing. All top of their game, radiology experts and pathology experts. And I just was like, well, obviously I have to meet with a doctor. So my surgeon had given me the name of someone at the hospital where I was operated on. And the hospital is a fantastic hospital. It's the best in New Jersey. But the cancer center there, even though it's very good, it's not, a nationally recognized name. So all the way along in the back of my head, I was like, okay, I'm going to meet with this doctor locally. And I looked him up and he was excellent. But I'm also going to meet with some doctors from nationally recognized hospitals. So I met with the initial oncologist from my local hospital, and he was incredible. He was just, first of all, just acknowledge what I had been through, which was a huge, huge thing for me. Just like that sensitivity really touched me. And I remember our conversation, it was over Zoom because of COVID, which is a bizarre way to start a relationship with an oncologist. But, he just went through everything with me. He really drilled down to brass tacks, like the kind of cancer, how the cancer is typically treated, went through all the treatment options with me. Basically, it's treated with an intensive chemotherapy regimen, starting with inpatient. You stay in the hospital for a week to get your first dose, and then go back every few weeks for a period of time. And oftentimes it's followed by radiation. And while he's saying all this, again, I'm just furiously taking notes, but all the while thinking I'm not doing this. This is crazy. I didn't even know that this cancer was on my thymus. It was very small. It wasn't like a big tumor. It was just a very small amount of cancer. And I'm just like, this can't be true. This can't be right. I'm not going into treatment, and more out of denial than anything else. And so I was like, okay, I'm sure when I meet with these other doctors, they're going to tell me that this is not necessary, that this is, this is something that I can just treat with a healthy lifestyle. And right before I got off the Zoom call with him, he said to me, depending on how risk averse you are, he said, because of your staging and because of the fact that the cancer that I was diagnosed with was thankfully generally considered highly curable, he's like, I would be willing to do a wait and watch approach with you. I was so relieved to hear it, but still was like, I'm still going to meet with the other doctors. So I thanked him. I had another PET scan with some doctors from a very, very large name hospital. And the PET scan came back. Thankfully, there was no visible cancer on the PET scan. I was healing very nicely from surgery. Everything looked great. So I was expecting to have a meeting with them saying exactly what I was hoping they were saying. Again, it was a Zoom call. And the doctor was like, your PET scan looks great, but we're going to recommend chemo. And she recommended the same chemo as the initial doctor did. And, I pushed back and I was like, but there's no cancer on the PET scan. How can this, be? And she was explaining how aggressive it is and how, cancer oftentimes, like by the time you find it, it's already manifested into something that could get out of control. And because of my age and because of the fact that I had kids and all these things that I had obviously been considering myself, like we should really nip it in the bud. And this will like eliminate any possibility of me succumbing to this. And so I was really upset. And I was like, I just can't wrap my head around this. This doesn't seem like the best course of action. And so she agreed to present my case to what they call the tumor board. And it's a board of, I think, about a dozen cancer doctors where they all review my case and make a recommendation as a team. The one thing that kept coming back time and time again from every single doctor I spoke to, including the original doctor, is that my case was highly unusual, like an incidental finding that hadn't manifested into a tumor because the cancer is so aggressive. By the time it's found, it's usually like stage 3, stage 4. So to find like a budding stage 1 cancer incidentally while removing something else was just like, no one really knew how to handle me. And they were all just like guessing, not guessing how to treat the cancer, but guessing how to treat my particular case. And so the tumor board came back and pretty much everyone voted to go forward with the chemo. So now I had like literally 13 to 14 doctors all recommending the same thing. Again, a hospital that is not only known for treating cancer, but a hospital that is known for its excellence in treating non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I came home and I was just like, I don't know if I'm crazy, but I feel like I can't do this. And I spoke with my husband and my parents, and they were just like, we're going to support you no matter what you decide. And, we understand why you wouldn't want to do it. And, we're going to be there for you no matter what. And that's pretty much what I needed to hear, is just to have the blessing of the people who were taking care of me and who would be taking care of my kids in either way was incredibly empowering. So I actually called Chris Carr, who I have worked for many years as her recipe developer. And anyone who knows Chris knows that she has overcome a stage 4, or she's actually living with a stage 4 cancer for now quite some time. And she has credited, holistic lifestyle change to the fact that she's still thriving. And Chris did me a huge favor by getting on the phone with me and kind of walking me through it. She listened to my story. She very patiently and sensitively, thought about where I might go from here. And she never told me what to do. She never said, don't get chemo or do get chemo, but she just set me up with resources. Maybe you would want to talk to this doctor. Maybe you'd want to read this book. And she actually even counseled me on how to present things to my audience at a certain point and kind of gave me the confidence to move forward as someone who'd been through it in a way that was, again, very sensitive and compassionate. And I will always be so grateful to her for that. And I got off the phone with her and I just felt really empowered. I was like, I think I know what I have to do. And I called up the first doctor, Dr. Scola at Morristown Hospital in New Jersey. And again, I am so grateful to him. And I said, let's do it. Let's do the wait and watch. And he has been incredible. He has handled me with so much compassion and sensitivity. And I'm here today in part because of him.
That's incredible. And you got into the story about talking to Chris and that being a pivotal part of the decision you made to pass on chemo, at least at the time. I'm sure there was internet searches and some digging online, but any other resources that were key for you in making that decision?
Yes. Chris Wark, who has written the book Chris Beat Cancer, overcame a really devastating diagnosis. He was, I think, stage 3C colon cancer, had a major operation and was also recommended chemo and decided to not have it. And I read his book. I was on my Amazon search history the other day. I I was recommending his book to someone. And I ordered his book the day of my diagnosis. I didn't remember that, but, I had ordered it that day because I had heard of him, but didn't really know his story in detail. Ordered his book, read it from cover to cover within a couple days. And he just laid it out so clearly what he did and some things about the medical industry that make the decision to get chemo not so cut and dry. I think, unfortunately, like, cancer patients are led to believe that is your only choice. If you don't get chemo, you're basically writing your own death sentence. And in some cases, that might be true. And I'm sure it is true in some cases, in many cases. But in a lot of cases, I think we're not giving our bodies a fair shot. And I had no idea the incredible, potential for healing that our bodies have. And reading his book, I read the book Radical Remission. Keith Block runs an integrative cancer center in Chicago, and I had his book on integrative healing. Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die, I read during that time. Incredibly transformative. I literally keep it on my countertop. So much information in there about the healing power of food and lifestyle change. And I just was so revved up. I was like, I'm going to do this. I've always been a little bit of a control freak, and the idea of handing over my life and well-being to a set of doctors just really freaked me out. And I had already relinquished so much control with the cyst. Obviously I can't do my own surgery. So that morning when I had the surgery was a real moment of surrender for me. And I remember very clearly, driving to the hospital, it was sunrise, and just feeling like this is not up to me. I have to just pray. And I'm not really a really religious person. So, but then when I got the cancer diagnosis, I was like, I'm taking the wheel. I'm not doing this. So I don't know if I was being naive or just hard-headed, but I was like, I'm going to be my own best advocate. And I'm going to take care of myself in a way that I have never taken care of myself before. And I took it extremely seriously. And I just devoured those books that I mentioned, podcasts. Dr. Christy Funk, even though she's a breast cancer surgeon, her advice was transformative for me. I listened to every podcast I could find with her on it. And those were really my beacons of hope and sort of my instruction manual. Of course, Chris Carr's work as well, which I had already been familiar with, but I was kind of always glossed over a lot of the cancer healing stuff. And now I was really reading it and taking it to heart. So.
All right. So to make sure I'm caught up on and fully understand everything to this point, when it comes to the treatment and diagnosis, the initial cyst wasn't cancerous, but they also removed the thymus at that time, which had stage 1 cancer.
Yes.
They want you to get chemotherapy at that point, the doctors, and you do your research and decide to opt out of that for now. Let's at this point talk about how things changed. I mentioned this before, but I want to get a good idea of what your diet and lifestyle was like before cancer. Once you got the diagnosis of pneumonia and treated that period of time in between getting your pneumonia and getting your tumor removed. And then again, it's almost like 3 different phases I'm seeing. And then the third phase of, okay, I'm opting out of chemo. I'm guessing there's different changes you made throughout the process. Yeah. So let's start by going all the way back to the beginning. You're feeling good. You're a health leader online, and you're in the plant-based world and sharing the vegan message. Talk about what your diet and lifestyle was like at that time.
So my diet was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, but it was not a bad vegan diet either. I was not living on junk food or processed food, mostly whole foods. I definitely love fried food. So I would go out to eat once or twice a week, or get takeout or whatever, restaurants takeout. And I cannot resist a good French fry, cannot resist a good, fried pickle. So it was, I would indulge. And other than that, though, I would say some processed things in the house, like tortilla chips, things like that, but not a huge percentage of my diet. I would say, these things were definitely eaten regularly, but not daily, maybe a few times a week. And at the time, I was not exercising at all. I had a baby. She was, only 9 months old when I had the pneumonia. So I was like, 100% in new mom mode. I was breastfeeding. I was up all night. I was, my little one was only in preschool. So I was like fully in it, with little ones and not really taking care of myself, probably getting a lot less sleep than I needed. I don't know the exact number of hours per sleep, but, I was being woken up frequently by my kids and, maybe like 6.5 hours a night at that point, maybe a little less here and there. And just running around, I was working part-time, doing freelance work, at home, of course, but, just really busy. So yeah, my diet was good, but I would say like my lifestyle was probably like a lot crazier than it should have been. And just not taking care of myself really, other than the food piece. And then once I got the pneumonia, I like literally like lost my appetite. I was, words cannot express like the extreme fear I was dealing with every day. I have journals from that time and they're really heartbreaking to read because I just like, I literally felt like the bottom dropped out of my life. And, it was all I could do to just like get food into my mouth and like feed myself. So again, like still vegan, but just trying to get through the day. I don't even remember what I was eating, to be honest with you. Um, and then once I got the diagnosis, I started very intentionally adding in all the anti-cancer foods that I was reading about. So I had always been eating things like cruciferous veggies, which are a very powerful anti-cancer food group. But I was like, now I'm like, I'm going to overdose on this stuff. Like, and I just remember like making, and I still do this actually. So I would make like avocado toast, which, I'd been eating all along, but then I would just like pile on the sprouts and then sprinkle on the turmeric, which is a high anti-cancer compound in there called curcumin. I would chop up like raw broccoli, raw garlic, like every single anti-cancer food I could that I read about, it was going into my diet. I was brewing hibiscus tea, which is really high antioxidant. I was eating all the dark red berries, the mushrooms, like everything. I started taking like a mushroom supplement, like an immunity mushroom supplement. And I was like I said, ODing on this stuff. I would make these like massive smoothies every day, using Chris Work's book as a very strong guiding principle in my diet changes. And I actually felt great. I felt the best I had ever had, I think, ironically. My energy was fantastic. I felt like in control. I felt vibrant and, it was just very bizarre because, this was all during like a very difficult time in my life when COVID was out of control. We were all in like deep quarantine at that point. And I wasn't even thinking about COVID. I was just thinking about this and so laser focused on it. So yeah, my diet changed in that way. And I would say like most of it carried over. I still do most of that stuff because I'm still technically not out of the woods. I have 5 years where I'm considered, to be still like in watch. They're keeping tabs on me every 6 months. So I'm still very much in anti-cancer mode. And honestly, I feel like I'll live this way the rest of my life because I just felt like this came out of nowhere. It could come out of nowhere again. And I'm going to like fight like hell to make sure that doesn't happen again.
All right. Well, in phase 3, we'll call it, you named a bunch of foods there you started adding in that are anti-cancer. The cruciferous veggies, so you mentioned garlic. I know that's one of your anti-cancer foods that you've added in. Let's really dig in and list off and re-highlight some of the ones you've gone over and then any other additions that you brought in at that time.
Sure. So the cruciferous veggies, for anyone who's not familiar, that's, kale, arugula, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, watercress, mustard greens, like all those like really like hearty, crunchy, chewy veggies. That's the cruciferous vegetable group. The health benefits of those foods in general are outstanding. There's really not one bad thing to say about them. And when you read about their cancer fighting potential, they're really miraculous. So those foods, dark leafy greens in general, so some that are not cruciferous veggies specifically that I was eating are Swiss chard, spinach, romaine lettuce, like things like that. Just like any dark leafies I was getting in there. Dark berries are one of Dr. Greger's, he's the author of How Not to Die, one of his power foods. His work on nutrition really highlights dark berries a lot. So I was getting them in my diet every day. In my smoothies specifically, I would just do frozen wild blueberries, which you can get at most supermarkets and at Costco. Um, and then even though I wasn't eating the whole berry, he recommends something called amla powder. So amla is Indian gooseberry, very difficult to find fresh. I think you might be able to find it frozen at some, Indian supermarkets, but from what I hear, it's not the most palatable berry, but it is sold in powdered form, which is apparently just as good from an antioxidant perspective as the whole berry. So I just ordered a bag of that from Amazon, and you actually don't need a lot. I think it's like half a teaspoon, and it's got like, I can't remember. It's like tenfold, if not like more than that, the number of antioxidants that you would find in a wild blueberry, which is in and of itself like a very powerful antioxidant food. So I would be adding in the amla powder. Turmeric, which I mentioned, contains something called curcumin, which is actually being studied in clinical trials as a powerful anti-cancer and cancer-fighting food. We don't hear more about it because there's no money in food. There's no, you can't market a spice or a vegetable and make a lot of money off of it. So unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about it. But when you start researching the power of curcumin, it's like, why is this not being shouted from the rooftops? It is so accessible. Turmeric is sold in pretty much every single supermarket across the country, widely popular in other areas of the country. It's in most curry powder. So, you can spice it up with lots of different things or just add it into your food as is. It's sold in powdered form. You can find it in whole form at a lot of Whole Foods type stores or, like I said, Indian grocery stores, Asian grocery stores usually have it even cheaper in whole root form. So I would buy that. I would just stick the whole thing in the freezer, like untouched. And then when I was ready to use it, I would just pull out one single root and wash it and throw it in the blender, or I would peel it and grate it into like rice or beans or whatever it is I was having that night. Mushrooms, super powerful cancer fighting food. I love mushrooms. I've always been a mushroom person. So, putting that on a lot of my food. And like I said, I started taking like a mushroom capsule. This man, Paul Stamets, studies mushrooms and mycology and just their incredible healing powers. And so he developed a line of mushroom supplements that I started taking every day. I also was warding off COVID at that time, so maybe that helped with that too. And then let's see, I said hibiscus is a very high antioxidant food, so I would make that into an iced tea. So even when I wasn't eating, I was still getting in my antioxidants. And all these things help your body's immunity and help your body's potential for warding off disease and healing from disease. Let's see, what else did I have? Garlic, like you said, raw garlic, excellent for immunity. It's also antiviral, antibacterial. So, really good in general during COVID. And those were, broccoli sprouts is part of the cruciferous veggie family. So broccoli sprouts contain a compound called sulforaphane, which is a major anti-cancer compound. And I learned how to sprout broccoli sprouts just by Googling. I found a tutorial online by Wellness Mama and learned how to sprout my own sprouts. And I've been eating them ever since. I happen to just really love them, but I do like a big handful of them on my lunch. And, all these things together, I think had a major, major impact on my diet and my general wellness.
And you mentioned that mushroom supplement there a couple of times. The amla is a powder, so I guess that could be kind of considered a supplement too. And I believe the turmeric was a supplement. But any other supplements, and I think you add the turmeric in as a food on top of that as
Yes.
well.
Mm-hmm.
But any other supplements that got added in once you're diagnosed?
Yeah, so the turmeric, like you said, I did the powdered form and the root form, but I also had a curcumin supplement that a family member of mine was taking for something else, and she had a great success on it. And so I started taking the same one as her, and I think I doubled or tripled what they recommend on the package because she was taking a lot as well for her specific condition. She also has a blood condition. So I was taking the curcumin supplement, the mushroom supplement, just a regular multivitamin. I take Complement, which is meant to complement an already healthy diet. So it's things that vegans might otherwise have a hard time getting, like B12 and D3, things like that. Yeah, just taking a lot of vitamin C. So I was getting it in a lot through my diet, but also making sure that, I was supplementing with it as well. Um, Not over supplementing, just like, whatever's recommended on the package. And then vitamin D as well. Vitamin D is related to immunity. And I was just really trying to bolster my immune system, like first and foremost, to fight off cancer cells, but also because the last thing I needed at that point was to get COVID. And this was while we were all in a very heightened state of fear and awareness about COVID. So, and I was being forced to go to the hospital and have blood tests and, just some invasive procedures where I was uncomfortable with how close I had to be to medical staff. So I really wanted to make sure that I was building up my immunity in that regard too. So the vitamin D helped with that as well.
It's obvious hearing you talk that you had a lot of guidance from doing reading on your own and different health influencers. But did you get any guidance from like a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor, anybody more in the alternative realm that went along with the conventional doctors you're working with?
Once I felt a little safer, because like I said, I was really not happy with the fact that it was being forced into doctors' offices during this time where everyone else was staying home. And I felt it was just kind of ironic that like I had to go out when I was feeling very vulnerable. So once things died down a little bit, of course, it was nowhere near the end of COVID, but probably like maybe that fall, I called a naturopath who I had seen before for something totally unrelated and liked him and, told him about my diagnosis. And he actually didn't really give me any specific dietary advice, but we identified stress as being a big problem in my life. So he gave me acupuncture for the stress. And then I can't remember what specifically. I think I told him like the diet that I was eating, and he was very supportive of that. But, wanted me to manage, my mental state. And that to him was a key component and a missing piece. So I had acupuncture several times. But beyond that, nothing with him specifically about, no extra supplementation or dietary change. And then on my own accord, I went to a Reiki healer. I had never done energy healing before. I was kind of like, I can't believe I'm doing this. But I had read in Radical Remission, one of the books I read when I was first diagnosed, that some people claim that their cancer was due to an energy blockage. And so at this point, I was like, why the hell not? We're going to throw everything at this because like, I never want to look back and be like, oh, I didn't try that. Maybe I should have. So I actually had some energy healing done. I have no idea if it made a difference or not. I just had one session. I did infrared sauna a few times during this time because it's known for detoxification. And again, I was just trying to clean out my system. Like I said, throwing everything at it that I possibly could.
You mentioned the supplement there, specifically taking Paul Stamets mushroom caps. Do you know specifically what was in those? Because I know he has a bunch of different blends, and some of them are tincture form, some are capsules. I know it's a really reputable brand and his information's incredible, but I'm just curious specifics on what you took there.
I would have to look it up. It's a number of different mushrooms. I know one of them is cordyceps, which is getting some bad press right now in The Last of Us, the HBO show. But it's actually an incredible mushroom with a lot of healing potential. So I know that that's one of the mushrooms. And off the top of my head, I can't remember. I would have to look it up. But if you look up I think it's called My Community Blend, I want to say. And it lists all the mushrooms that are in that blend.
So one of the blends, okay. And
Yeah.
It was a capsule?
Yes, it was a capsule, and I believe you are supposed to take 2 a day. And if you'd like, I can look it up after we chat, and you can put it in the show notes. But yeah, it's one of his like standard immunity formulas.
All right. Yeah, we'll add it later. And part of the reason I wanted to jump into that is quality is something we haven't discussed yet. And I know his supplements are the highest quality. Talk about food quality and supplement quality before and after diagnosis. So, there's organic food and you're not having meat. So, you're not into the grass-fed or wild meats. We don't have to go there. But when it comes to supplements and produce, Was organic and non GMO a concern pre diagnosis, post diagnosis, or is that not something you factor in?
I was pretty conscious of it before diagnosis. I'm someone who like loves to read about this stuff. There's a reason why I do what I do. I just, really love hearing about food and how it's produced and its impact on not only our bodies but the environment. I'm deeply connected to and committed to our planet. And when I read about the impact of pesticides on the planet, it's very disheartening. It's very frustrating. And then certain things that are sprayed on plants are actually directly linked to my specific kind of cancer. So Roundup exposure is linked to my cancer. So something that I cared about before, I just doubled down on it. So food is an investment, especially healthy food and organic food. I know that organic food is, not available to everybody. And for some people, it's out of the question with their budget. So I would just recommend looking at the Dirty Dozen and trying to make the room in your budget for those foods. And if you can afford to get organic otherwise, I do feel like it's worthwhile. The science is just emerging on the impact of, GMOs and its impact on our health and well-being. And I feel like your health is all you have. If you lose your health, like you can't do anything else. So I feel like it's such a worthwhile investment to pay the extra money if you can for the non-GMO and organic foods. So yes, I do try to eat mostly organic. Of course, non-organic food gets in there here and there, especially when I go out. I try to prioritize it without getting psychotic about it.
Right. And sticking on this food quality piece a little bit here too, have you made going to farmers markets more of a priority, getting more local produce, organic when you can there? And you mentioned the broccoli sprouts, so you're now doing those. Do you grow any of your own food? Did you do that before, or did you start to grow, gardening and getting into that to have more control over your food?
Yeah. So my husband, who, you're going to make me get emotional again. He was such an angel. He is such an angel. But during that time, he started making all these like microgreens for me and growing all these dark leafy greens in our garden because I was eating them with such abundance. And we were trying to avoid going to the supermarket more than we had to because of COVID. And so he started a gorgeous garden for us in the backyard. And he handles it completely on his own. So I wish I could help him out, but I'm kind of strapped for time. So that's his baby. And he does such a beautiful job. We grow mostly dark leafy greens, but we also have tomatoes and peppers and squash and cucumbers and herbs. And we actually have a few fruit trees that are starting to produce more and more. So we do grow a lot of food. We definitely don't grow all of our own food. And then anything beyond that, during the colder months, I shop at conventional supermarkets. And then during the summer months, I do some shopping at conventional supermarkets, but I try to buy a lot of produce from farmers markets. So we're lucky that we live in an area with a lot of farms. So we have a bunch of farmers markets available to us. And actually only like 15 minutes from my house, there's this farm called Ethos Farm Project. And it's actually helmed by a doctor who I've since started to see as a patient, Dr. Ron Weiss. He does lifestyle medicine. He's a board certified lifestyle medicine doctor. And his mission is incredible. He believes very much in healing through food and combating and preventing and treating illness through diet and lifestyle. And he has this incredible farm that has grown so much since I've moved to the area. And he practices all regenerative organic techniques. The food is absolutely beautiful. You can see and taste the difference in the food. And so my family, we actually go every single weekend when the farm stand is open. And it's become like a little family tradition for us. And we've gotten to know the farmers there. And, you can see, all of their equipment and greenhouses and everything. And they're happy to take you for a tour. And it's a beautiful place. And you could just I don't know, it feels like walking into nature's pharmacy. And I'm very passionate about going there because I just feel like that was a big part of my healing journey as well.
And naturally, food is going to be a big part of this conversation and a big part of what you took on throughout your health journey. But I want to make sure one of my goals with the conversation is to make sure it's clear that food is just one piece of this. And you mentioned stress, and we're going to take some time and get into that piece. But there are so many other factors and so many different lifestyle factors that culminate to, our total health of as a person. And I say that up front, wanting to delve into some of these other areas that toxins can come into our homes and our lives. And it gets me curious about thinking about different areas in the home that you can control. And again, I'm always curious before and after. Like, are you guys filtering your water, filtering your air, um, chemicals that you use to clean? Like, were these a concern before? And then now, after the diagnosis, have they continued to be part of the protocol, or is that new since the diagnosis?
So the short answer is that I was aware and conscious of it before, but I've, drilled down even more. So I started becoming aware of toxins in our environment when I got pregnant. I wanted very much to have the healthiest pregnancy possible, and obviously to take care of my child before she was even born. So I felt it was my responsibility to her to avoid anything that could hurt her / us. So at that point, I started researching cleaning products and personal care products and makeup, things like that, where I could really clean it up. And also, just even before that, I was trying to buy things that weren't tested on animals. That was like kind of the first step, is one of the first reasons why I became vegetarian and later vegan was the ethical side. So that was a concern for me before I even started thinking about health. And then I later realized, well, this is kind of a win-win, because a lot of the products that were gentler on the animals were also made more consciously with better ingredients. That's not always the case, but a lot of the times it is. So I started researching brands through Environmental Working Group and seeing things that were not going to be harmful in my home, that wouldn't impact my pregnancy, that I could feel safe using around my kids. And very gradually, this didn't happen overnight, because I think it's very expensive to switch out everything all at once, and it can be very overwhelming. So like little by little, over the course of, I would say, like 5 or 6 years, I cleaned up our household products and personal care products, and then started replacing plastic things in my house. So started, replacing like little kids cups instead of using plastic kids cups and plates and stuff like that, and getting stainless steel and wood and, more sustainable materials. They also, are gentler on the planet. So again, this was like all interconnected for me, trying to do everything I could for myself, for my kids, for the planet, for the animals. And so I felt it was a very worthwhile shift and investment. So I would say most of that was in place before my diagnosis. And then after my diagnosis, I bought a water filter. That was the one thing that I wasn't doing any differently. We have well water in my house, and it's been tested. And, as far as I know, as far as the last test shows, it's safe to drink and clean. But I wasn't filtering it out. And so I bought a Berkey water filter and just, have that as an added precaution. But yeah, again, I try very hard to not get neurotic about things. I have a tendency to be all or nothing and very black and white thinking, and I have to really control that. You can't always fully control your environment as much as you can try. And I don't want to go down a road where I'm living in fear, because that adds to my stress, which, like I said, was, I think, a contributing factor in me getting sick. So I do the best I can. And in the areas of my home where, I still need improvement, I know we'll get there, but I think we're doing a pretty good job. I think we ticked all the major boxes.
Well, let's stick on the stress piece and talk about what your stress level was like coming into getting sick with pneumonia. So when, you're living your day-to-day life before all this started, and obviously this is a really unique time part of your story. Your story is right before COVID, and then, as things are happening, we're entering COVID, and you're a young mom, so you have, the beautiful stress that comes along with that. So you have these unique layers to your story. But let's talk about pre all of this, what stress was like for you at that time.
Sure. So I'm in general a very high achiever. I always have been my whole life. As I mentioned, I have perfectionistic tendencies. I definitely have obsessive tendencies, without going too far down the psychological rabbit hole. So all of these things on one hand have really served me. And, I feel like in most areas of my life, when I set my mind to something, I can achieve it on some level. Um, and, I'm proud of myself. Like, I feel like everything that I have in my life, like I've done for myself, like nothing was given to me. And even though I've had support along the way, no one handed me my job. No one handed me my education. So in some ways it's served me very well. In other ways, it's driven me crazy. I feel like I'm always climbing that ladder, or I always was climbing that ladder, like reaching for the next rung, never really being content with where I was. So always seeing things as like a stepping stone for the next thing. And then, with parenthood, even though, like you said, it's a beautiful stress, I put a lot of pressure on myself as a mom. I want to be the perfect mom to my kids. And, it's impossible. But, I just feel like I only get this one chance for their childhood, and I wanted to do everything right. So, one of the main sources of stress for me as a mom was breastfeeding. I could not produce enough milk, and I white knuckled it like with my firstborn. We breastfed for a little over a year, but it was excruciating. Like, I literally could not leave her because I couldn't pump enough to leave her side. So, my whole life was basically on demand feeding, and she was hungry all the time because I didn't really produce a lot of milk. I was very rigid, not wanting to give her formula because I didn't want to give her dairy formula. But I also knew that the soy formulas at the time, like, really didn't have the best ingredients. So it wasn't until like the very end of our breastfeeding journey that I started to let up a little bit and supplement a little bit with formula. And it was a relief for me. I was just like, oh my God, why did I resist this for so long? And so, like, now when I see new mothers struggling, I'm just like, it's fine. Like, your baby needs you to be healthy and not be a psychological mess because you're trying to do things like the way that you read in a book. And yes, breastfeeding has incredible benefits, but having a sick mom mentally or physically is not helping your child either. So, I really had to like toe that line and between wanting to do the best thing for my kid, but looking out for myself. So with my second born, which was right before I got sick, even though I had learned a little bit from my first time around, I was still really trying to do it right. I was like, okay, maybe I just need to eat more oatmeal or like whatever the things they tell you to eat to produce more milk. And I was, still meeting with lactation consultants and trying to do it. And I finally had to like relinquish some control a lot earlier than what I did with my firstborn. So my secondborn, we only exclusively breastfed for probably like 3 or 4 months. And even though I was more comfortable with, leaning into supplementing with formula at that time, like I still felt like a major failure. Because for me, I had met with enough people to know that this was like a physical problem that I had. I just could not produce enough milk. And, I felt a real sadness and mourning with that. And then the hormonal shifts that come from stopping breastfeeding are, at least in my case, like very intense. So, I was depressed. I was, beating myself up over the breastfeeding journey again. And my career was starting to pick up at that point. So I had started working, with Chris Carr when my older daughter was, very little, still a baby. And then I had met Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, a fiber-fueled. He actually approached me only about a month before my daughter was born to ask me if I wanted to work with him on fiber fueled, and I couldn't because I was about to give birth. But since we couldn't work together on his book, we started working together on a lot of his online programs as his career was really taking off. So I was getting like more and more work with him. I started working with John and Ocean Robbins, which is like a lifelong dream, full circle, because that's how my dad initially became vegetarian, through John Robbins' work. So I was really excited to be like getting these opportunities to have more impact and work with some dream people, but just trying to juggle new motherhood with my career taking off was difficult for me. And I just wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't making time for my own needs. Most moms put their needs dead last, and I was no exception to that. I have a difficult time accepting help. So even though, my parents live relatively nearby and were offering to help, I didn't want to inconvenience them. I didn't want to bother them. My husband was trying to reestablish his career in New Jersey. We had moved from Long Island, so I didn't want to take up his time, and was trying to do it all, and it crashed down on me. So
So, at what point did you make this realization along the health journey? And then, what are some of the steps you took to start taking better care of yourself?
I think I was forced to slow down when this whole thing happened with the pneumonia, because I obviously like could not be everything to everyone anymore when I was like barely able to like get through the day. So I had to accept help. It was, a moment of surrender for me, and I think my family would have insisted on it anyway. So, coming over and watching the kids while I went to doctor's appointments and, did all the various things I had to do, the testing that I had to go through. Thank goodness my family was there for me and, really stepped up in that regard. And it wasn't until I got my diagnosis that I realized I had to either start seeing a therapist or figure out another way to deal with all of my stuff, all of my mental stuff. And at the time, like therapy wasn't really an option because, first of all, I just didn't want to go to anyone's office. And I had tried apps like BetterHelp and some of the online apps, and I just wasn't clicking with some of the therapists that, I had been connected with, and it just wasn't working. So I discontinued that. So my dad, who's been a long time meditator and someone who has used mindfulness to get through a lot of the difficult things in his life, recommended that I take a mindfulness-based stress reduction course, which is widely offered across the country. It's based on John Kabat-Zinn's work. And they were running something online since, again, during quarantine. And he actually gifted it to me, I think, as a plea to kind of take care of the mental piece. And so I started this MBSR course. And I have to say, even though I liked it and I liked the tenets of it, it was just kind of too much for me to be in a group setting at that time in my life. Again, I just felt like I was like psychologically like all over the place, and it was very difficult for me to sit there and focus and commit. So about halfway through the program, I asked if I could recontinue at a different time. Since my father had already paid in full for the program, I wanted to take it again at another time, and, kind of dropped out, like I would say, halfway to 2/3 of the way through, and instead decided to really take this opportunity to learn how to meditate. It's something that he had always been trying to get me to do for a long time. And I just kind of always felt like meditation's not for me. And I had even gone on a meditation retreat and it just didn't resonate. And, but I really was like, let me look at this from a non-perfectionistic point of view, instead of trying to do like the ideal meditation of like 20 minutes in silence and perfect Zen experience. I started out with like these like little 8 to 10 minute guided meditations on Insight Timer, which is an app, free app. And that was how I started. And I would do these, and I did a couple that were just like, basic introductory meditations, but I also did a few meditations focused on healing, which were really helpful to me at the time. Anytime I would have a scan, which were frequent at the time, I would do like a healing meditation to help manage my stress surrounding scans, which was considerable. And then just managing day-to-day stress, just really focusing on being present in the moment. And thankfully that habit has carried out. And I'm still practicing meditation most days per week 3 years later. I never thought I would, but it's been a major tool for me. And then once COVID subsided, I started seeing a therapist again, someone local, and, working with her. And she was incredible for me. And so I feel like therapy and meditation and just, being present and trying to get out in nature were the main tools that I relied on to manage the stress and depression pieces.
I'd have to imagine getting a diagnosis of cancer would totally flip your world upside down and change your whole outlook on life and change your priorities and how you sweat the small stuff. So what I'm getting at here is, I would assume by default, just being in your position, it would focus you in on what really matters in life. And a lot of the quote unquote small stuff maybe you worried about before, the perfectionism. Did you find that just being in your situation, you were able to kind of let a lot of that small stuff go naturally?
Yes, yeah, there's still things that I'm, of course, working on, but I think what came into focus for me was the fact that not that other things don't matter, but they're really not essential to my happiness in the way that I thought that they were. So, achieving certain things in my career, I used to feel were so important, and I've just like let them go. And I've realized, what matters to me about my job is that I get to spread a message that means something to me. And I've kind of let go of the external validation. I used to think I had to get a book deal or make a certain amount of money or have a certain amount of followers to feel successful. And now I'm realizing like the messages I get from people regarding their health and cancer mean so much more to me than any of those things. And so like that's what matters in that regard. And then of course on top of like more so than any of the career stuff is just my family. Um I am I just, they're the only thing that really truly matter. And so like anytime I get distracted by the other things, I'm just like, I'm here and I'm able to take care of my kids. And I have a wonderful marriage with a supportive partner and amazing parents and siblings. And like, that's really it, and if the other things don't work out, yes, it's a bummer, but what matters is that I'm healthy and my family is healthy. And I bring myself back to that daily. If I get stressed about something, I have that gratitude. And it sounds cheesy, but like, you don't realize until you feel like your life is out of your control to really focus on that stuff. Unfortunately, it usually does take some sort of trauma to really understand that the other stuff doesn't matter. And I'm grateful though, because I used to, I used to hang on, past friendships that didn't work out and, other little things that I would just harp on and obsess over. And now I'm just like, I'm at peace and I feel grounded, and I'm very grateful for that.
And a lot of what you just talked about there sounds like a lot of the cliche things that a lot of people say pre-diagnosis of something like cancer. But I'd have to imagine the silver lining, and of course you'd never wish to that upon yourself what you've been through in cancer. But I'd have to imagine you feel and live that now in a way that only going through what you've been through, you could be feeling it the way you do and living the way you do.
Yeah. I think it's something that you think about, like you said, even if you haven't gone through something traumatic. I think a lot of people have deep gratitude and appreciation, but it feels like almost visceral when you've gone through something, whether it be illness or a loss or addiction or whatever, to really make you reevaluate and reprioritize. You're forced to. And you kind of drill down to brass tacks in your life. And, you really have to go through it, I think, to really understand what it means to be here and, to have this opportunity to be alive and to be well. And the things that we take for granted, I think one of the things that became so clear to me through this experience is like I would wake up every day, and I mentioned to you I kept a journal during this time, and every day I would wake up and wonder like, do I have cancer? Am I going to die from cancer? How long do I have if I have cancer? Like these questions were like on a loop. Like how old will I be when I die, and will my kids remember me? And now I wake up, and not that I'm guaranteed, any of us could die any day, but I think, just waking up and feeling well is just like you don't understand what a relief that is until you've lived the opposite way for a period of time.
And I know these facilities weren't part of your treatment story, but when I think about healing facilities in the US, a couple of them come to mind. True North and Hippocrates down in Florida. Did you come across those in your searching when you were diagnosed with cancer? And did you contemplate including those in your protocol? Or looking back at what you did, would you consider those if you could go back again? I'm just curious on how you think about those. And for somebody that might be in your shoes, 2019, just, or actually 2020 when you got diagnosed, but somebody newly diagnosed, would you consider that an option at this point?
Yeah, for sure. So I had heard of both facilities. I had known about Hippocrates because I think Chris Carr actually did some education or training there when she was first starting out. So I knew about Hippocrates through her. Um, and then True North, I had learned about in the very early stages of researching holistic cancer healing. And so my plan of action has always been if the cancer advances, to either immediately go into treatment or to go to True North. So that's always been like one of my two options if the cancer were to, God forbid, come back, or if later in life I were to be diagnosed with another chronic illness. True North would be top of mind for me because some of the healing stories that come out of that place are incredible. And the work of the doctors there is, really, really amazing when, people go in there with like stage 3, stage 4 incurable cancers and somehow end up in remission. So I figure like, if you can devote the resources to it, you have nothing to lose, the resources and time. So, if someone's dealing with a late stage or even early stage cancer and you want to try the holistic route, I would absolutely recommend looking into it. It's probably not for everybody. Their fasting program is pretty drastic, but if you're very serious about healing and throwing everything you can at your diagnosis, I think it's a worthwhile option to consider. And the reason why I did not go when I was diagnosed is for a few reasons. First of all, my cancer at the time, which I told you, it wasn't even showing up on PET scans. So for me to fly across the country and devote the time and resources away from my family during the height of quarantine just did not seem like it made sense for me. But like I said, if I had been diagnosed at a different time, I would have potentially considered it.
And at the time of your diagnosis, were you aware of fasting? And was that something you implemented?
Yeah, so I started reading about fasting, and I didn't want to do a severe fast because I felt like if I was going to do a water fast, I would want that to be medically supervised. Plus, I doubted my ability to follow through with a water fast if, I'm cooking for my family all day long. I just felt like this is a losing battle for me. I love food. Obviously, it's my job. So the water fast didn't really cross my mind, but I had come across the research of Dr. Walter Longo, who studies fasting and specifically fasting as it relates to cancer. And he developed a fasting mimicking program called Prolon. And Prolon is, a packaged product that you can order. And basically it's 5 days worth of food, but it's very low on the calorie scale. And it basically tricks your body into thinking that it is fasting, but it's designed so that you're technically meeting your nutritional requirements for those 5 days. He recommends you don't go beyond the 5 days on the program. So it's basically a couple of dehydrated soups and some kale crackers and olives, and it sounds very sparse, and it is, but your body basically goes through cell death. So it kind of cleans up. Think of it just as like, putting your cells through the washing machine, and like anything old and dying just gets killed off and it regenerates new cells and your body can heal that way. So that's the very high level overview. Your body goes through something called autophagy, which is the cell cleanup. And that's why I did it. So I figured, if I do have errant cancer cells running around my body, hopefully this will take care of them. And so I did do Prolon every 3 months for about a year. And then now I try to do it like a couple times a year. But it's pricey. But I think if you're serious about, nipping something in the bud holistically, it's worthwhile to give it a shot.
You mentioned not being interested in water fasting, but in your day-to-day maintenance routine at this point, do you do any intermittent fasting?
So I sort of intermittent fast naturally. I eat dinner with my kids. So that's usually around like 5:30, 6 p.m. And I have never been a breakfast person my whole life. Much to the dismay of nutritionists I've seen in the past. I just cannot get on board with a meal before 10 a.m. So usually I'll have coffee in the morning. I feel like I sound like Gwyneth Paltrow's interview. But I have coffee in the morning and then I'll eat something around like 10 or 11-ish. I'll have like a small mini meal. So like some fruit or a smoothie or something like that. And then I'll have lunch. So a full lunch. So I do intermittent fasting, but I don't time it. If I'm hungry, I'll eat.
I can imagine digging in the online world and doing your research at the time of diagnosis, you would have come across so many different treatment protocols that have quote unquote work for different people. Having such a firm belief in being part of the plant-based world for so long before diagnosis, did it cross your mind at all to try any other different types of diets at that time?
No, only because the science for plant-based diets, specifically as it relates to chronic disease, is so strong and so compelling. And, this is beyond just what you see on Instagram or on blogs. I was actually reading medical journals, and I mentioned Dr. Greger's work. He is heavily cited. If you read his How Not to Die, like the footnote section is like practically half the book. So this is everything he says is all linked back to an article or study or meta-analysis. And I felt no reason to stray from that because I wasn't reading anything to make me believe that there could be something about my diet that was causing an issue or something in another diet that could offer me something I wasn't already getting. And in fact, I think the more I read about other diets, just, in the course of my research, the more I was convinced that they were not for me and not for an anti-cancer protocol.
At the time of your chest x-ray, the cyst, at the time you didn't know it was a cyst, but the mass they found was the size of a grapefruit. Given what you know now about that mass and your health history, do they know how long it had been, or can they guess how far back that had started growing in your body?
So my surgeon does not know for sure because that was the first chest x-ray I had ever gotten. So there was no basis of comparison. But he's guessing based on the composition of the cyst and the size, and it had calcification on it, that it had been in my body for quite some time. So if not my whole life, then a very long time. And they don't know at what rate it was growing. So I just have to pray it's like not some condition where it comes back. I mean, that's never been mentioned to me. But they don't really know why it was there. It's still kind of a mystery.
And part of the reason I'm questioning that is just obviously the diet and lifestyle you've chosen is atypical. And I'm just curious if it's crossed your mind. It must have at least crossed your mind to think that the way you were living and eating, could that have led to cancer? And obviously you're somebody who did the research and continued to follow that same lifestyle, only more rigid. So obviously you don't feel like at this point that was what caused it. But I'm sure at least somewhere along the journey that has crossed your mind.
I mean, it's possible. I really have no way of knowing. My diet has evolved so much over the course of my life that it's impossible for me to say if I contributed to it in what ways. And also, we're all exposed to different things in our environment that we're not even aware of most of the time, and that we have no way of controlling. I mean, most people don't even realize that when you fly, you get high doses of radiation, which are linked to all kinds of issues. So, and of course, you can't control what your neighbor is spraying on their yard or the things that, you're breathing at your workplace. So I really don't know. I think my diet used to be a lot less healthy than it is now. Most of my life when I was little, I was eating meat and dairy every day, up until the point I was like, 8 or 9 years old. And then I switched to a vegetarian diet. But my diet was a lot of dairy, a lot of cheese. I love cheese, like every day, in abundance, and a lot more processed food. And then in my college years, I was your typical college kid. I was just eating garbage and, at 3 a.m, eating Domino's pizza and like drinking heavily 3 nights a week. And, just having the party lifestyle. And then as a young professional in New York City, the same type of thing. Maybe not to the extreme in college, but, going out on the weekends and not getting enough sleep and just generally abusing my body. And it wasn't until I got older and got married and eventually had kids that I realized like this is going to catch up with me and I have to clean it up. And thankfully, it was like a natural progression. And, I feel very much, happy with the way. I'm glad I had those years. They were a lot of fun, but, I'm sure it damaged my health.
Do your husband and kids eat the same diet as you?
I cook vegan at home. I don't cook with animal products, but I don't prohibit anyone eating anything. I mean, for my kids, to an extent, yes. So I don't serve them meat, and I also would not allow, at least under my watch, for them to eat meat outside the home. When they're older, of course, they can make their own decisions. But right now, they eat vegan at home, and when they're out, they can eat, pizza. If they're at a party, like a cupcake, I try not to police that too much. I don't want them to grow up with food issues, feeling like things are off limits or too restricted, or that, you're going to get sick if you have one piece of candy. I try to teach them how to eat intuitively. If they eat too much candy, instead of saying, candy is terrible for you and it feeds cancer, I'll say, how does your body feel? Do you feel, mommy feels really tired when I eat too much sugar? I'll tell them something like that. And then my husband, actually, when I met him and up until COVID, he was eating pretty much a standard American diet and was always open to eating my vegetarian and vegan cooking, but never really adapted it until the beginning of COVID, when I started having my health issues. He started cleaning up his diet a lot and actually went vegetarian. And then about a year and change ago, his a very close family member of his suffered a massive stroke. He had another family member who is paralyzed due to a stroke. So he had several health events in his immediate family, that I think really opened up his eyes that, if he's not careful, he could potentially suffer the same fate. So now he's still vegetarian and leaning more heavily into vegan foods.
It's obvious hearing your story, how supportive your family's been along your health journey here. I'm curious, for somebody, again, tuning in who might be in the early stages, getting diagnosed with cancer and trying to navigate that world, and maybe they don't have the same support system of their family being there for them. Are there other outlets that you found online to be helpful, different communities, things people can reach out to connect with other people going through the same kind of thing, with or without family support?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, especially when making changes, support is huge, it's paramount. I don't know if I would have stayed vegetarian, even never mind vegan, had I not been going through that transition at the same time as my family. So my family all kind of went vegetarian around the same time, and then we all very incidentally went vegan at the same time. This was not like a plan. I announced to my family that I was going to try veganism, and my dad was like, oh, me too. Like, I had made the same decision like a week ago. It was just very bizarre. But it was great because we were all kind of learning together and going through it together and relating to the challenges together. And we weren't the only one at the family event, asking for the vegan side at Thanksgiving. So I recognize that my situation is atypical in that regard, and I'm very grateful for it. And then I happened to marry someone who's very open-minded and very supportive. And he has always been that way since we met. And maybe that's why we ended up, having a successful marriage, because, I feel like he's never tried to push his ideals on me, and vice versa. Even though I'm very outspoken about the benefits of my diet, I try not to push it on him. And then for anyone who is not in that situation, first of all, just, remain convicted in your beliefs. If you read enough or listen to enough and you're feeling really fired up about something and you want to make that change, you are entirely up to you. So if something means enough to you, you have to make up your mind to make it happen, even if you have naysayers around you. And there are going to be people who are going to tell you that you're putting your health at risk, that you're not getting enough protein, that, where's your B12 coming from? There's always going to be someone who's going to question a lifestyle change, even if you're not vegan, like making any major dietary shift. People get very uncomfortable because it's almost a reflection on them. It's, they feel it's a commentary that maybe they're not eating well or they're not healthy. And that's their stuff. Just focus on you and what you want to do for yourself. And then, yes, if you can find community, whether that be locally through a meetup group, or sometimes yoga studios have health-minded people that might, be interested or kind of following the same path as you, gyms, etc. Local community is huge. And if not, I've actually met so many wonderful people through Instagram. Social media can be a mixed bag, but one of the amazing things about it is I feel like there's somebody for everybody, so if you're into whole food, plant-based living, there are so many accounts to follow and just engage with people. I've made some really great online friendships just messaging people and commenting on their posts, or, telling them I loved their podcast interview or whatever. And sometimes it results in a conversation, and, you can meet some great people that way. And yeah, I just think not being judgmental and, opening yourself up to others, even if they don't align with you. Sometimes you find out that you have more in common than you think.
Speaking of Instagram, I saw and read the post where you announced to your community you had been, dealing with cancer and going through this healing journey. Talk about at what point that was when you made that announcement and what that felt like.
I had been sort of wondering how and when I was going to say something. And, I was trying to keep in mind, I'm not Oprah Winfrey. It's not like I'm going to make this announcement and it's going to be this like earth-shaking thing. I have, a relatively small community of people, but I felt I owed it to them because of my messaging and because of my, just general stance on food and nutrition, that, I wanted to let them know what I had gone through, because I also felt like ultimately I wanted to make the announcement because I felt like I had amassed so much knowledge about cancer and cancer nutrition and healing that I felt like it would be such a shame if I couldn't share it and potentially help somebody. And even if the practical information went nowhere and no one, adapted what I did, I think just feeling less alone. That's one of the worst parts of cancer, is just feeling completely isolated. Even if you have, I was surrounded by people who love me and who lifted me up, but I felt really alone a lot, because I felt like no one really understood how terrified I was. They said they understood, but I'm like, I don't think you really get it. And like, anytime I would have a scan, I would be like a complete head case for like days leading up to the scan, and in the days leading up to me getting the results of the scan. And learning that there's a whole community of people out there who had coined the term scanxiety, I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is incredible that, there are people out there who understand. And I wanted to be that person for anyone struggling, and to let them know that, you're going to be okay. And even if your cancer is very scary, you're going to get through it one day at a time. And, if you need any help along the way, I'll offer whatever I can.
I'd have to imagine there was an extra layer of difficulty sharing that message as somebody in the public eye, as somebody in the health world, versus somebody in the public eye as, say, a comedian or an actor, because your message was health. And obviously at the time you were going through a health crisis. So talk about that dynamic.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things I talked to Chris Carr about is, when I had that initial conversation with her, I said, I can't remember what my exact words were, but I just told her, like, what is this going to do to my career? And she basically was like, honestly, Lauren, like, people are going to have something to say about no matter what you do. So if you choose to get chemo, there's going to be people that are like, oh, I thought you were holistically minded. Like, where did that go? And then if you decide to not have chemo, there are people who are like, you're a mom. Like, how dare you? You should be thinking about your kids. And she's like, you just have to tune it out, because there's always going to be a naysayer. There's always going to be somebody who's questioning you or making you feel bad. And, like I said before, you have to make the choice for you, and you have to live with the benefits and the consequences of that choice, regardless of what other people say. And I carried that with me. And, my mom's always been very similar in terms of the advice she's given me my whole life, basically to stay in my lane, in the sense that, like, don't really worry about what other people think. And so when I made the announcement, I was kind of like sturding myself, like, this is where I get like some nasty messages from people. And I was very surprised. Like, no, everyone is very compassionate. And if people did have negative things to say about me, they didn't say them to my face, which I was very grateful for because it's just so sensitive. And, anyone who has been through cancer knows like you really cannot judge anybody based on their choices because it's just such an excruciating thing to go through.
Yeah, from quickly looking at the comments, it looked very supportive and people understood and, like you said, had compassion.
Definitely.
Lauren, as somebody who has been through such a journey and you've come to this place now where your health is in good shape, and you mentioned you're not at that 5-year point where you can claim that, I guess, is it full remission at that point?
Yes, at that point, I believe my doctor will tell me that we're done with formal visits and updates and blood work, etc. And I think it will be declared in my medical paperwork in remission. Correct.
Okay. What I'm getting at here with that question is somebody who is in your shoes back in early 2020. Picture where you were at that point and what all the emotions you're going through and that haze you're in. Before we part ways, let's leave them some guiding inspiration and direction as somebody who's been through that, what you'd say to that person.
So there's two statements that are popular in the, cancer/chronic disease community that I thought of nearly every day and still carry with me. And one is just faith over fear. You have to have just belief that you will get through it, even if there's no evidence at that moment to give you that faith, because like the alternative is just worry and fear, and that definitely won't help you. It's extremely difficult to practice that surrender to a higher power or to just fate bringing you through. That's the first. And the second is the only way out is through. So you have to just take one step at a time. Like you have to go through the surgery. You have to go through the doctor's visits. If you choose to get the treatment, you have to sit there in the chemo lounge and get the chemo. And if you decide to go the holistic route the way I did, you have to really fully believe in your soul that you are capable of healing. And Chris Work said it, and it's so true that, people who come through this on the other side really believed from day one that they were capable of healing themselves. They didn't question it. And I definitely had that unshakable faith. I was like, I will be damned if I don't do everything in my power to get through this because like the stakes are too high. And I think having that unshakable faith that you are capable of making change and going through the steps to get better, you have to be your own advocate and believe in yourself and believe in your ability to heal.
That's beautiful. And as you're sharing that, I can only picture going through what you went through. One of the paradoxes of that is you talked about stress being something you're dealing with beforehand. You're going to have the added stress and the added sleepless nights. Going through a cancer journey, naturally is going to take you through a whirlwind of stress, of having to put aside maybe some of the healthy lifestyle practices that you had going in. So what I'm getting at here is, and you can let me know if you'd agree with this, but like as somebody's going through this, to have a little bit of realizing things aren't necessarily going to be perfect when you're in the whirlwind of it, but that is just part of the journey at that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I, like you said, I of course experienced stress. Like I said, going through the scans and the doctor's visits were very hard on me, but in a way that part, the healing part or the active cancer part was easier than before the diagnosis because I felt like I finally had a plan. I knew what I was going to do. I knew like all the steps that I needed to take. I knew I had a doctor who was watching me and who was making sure that from a medical perspective, all of my tests were coming back a certain way. And I even had in my head a game plan for if the cancer were to reemerge or progress. And that was really freeing. And like I said before, the waiting is the worst part. Just waiting for the results and the pathology and all that is hell. And then once you have the diagnosis or the staging, at that point, you can come up with a plan that you feel comfortable with and execute. And, like I said, as someone who likes being in control of things, who likes, I'm a doer, I felt a lot of comfort and relief in that.
Lauren, I want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing your story. I know it's got to be hard to go back through that and relive, but your story is just so inspiring and gives people, I'm sure, so much hope and direction if they choose to follow a similar path. And I just want to thank you for coming on and being so open and honest and sharing the ups and downs. And I'm just so happy for you where you're at with your health, and I wish you continued health. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your sensitivity today.
Now that you're done my conversation with Lauren, you're going to want to stick around here and catch my chat with Professor Seyfried. He shares the secret to starving cancer. You don't want to miss this. I'll see you over there.
And I have the science to say what you should do, but it's up to you to determine whether or not you want to do that. The body will turn